Hello everyone, this is Leah Whitehorse from Lunar Astrology, and in this recording I'm going to be looking at the astrology of November 2022. So as we come into this month, the most important thing that we need to remember is that we are in the middle of eclipse season. Mars is out of bounds, which means that our cosmic warrior is not really playing by the rules for the time being. And Mars is retrograde in Gemini. So everything is almost like in slow motion at the moment. We're going over our battle plan, we're reassessing our goals, reviewing connections, trying to figure out our motivation or to find some motivation or inspiration. Now, if you want to know more about this Mars retrograde, I've posted about 9,000 words of content on this transit over on my Patreon. It includes horoscopes for all the signs. I've got an article on Mars, the myths and the meaning. I've got another article exploring this transit in full with all the details of the aspects and dates of the aspects and looking at the Sabian symbols of the station degrees. And there's also an article on how to work with this Mars retrograde magically or intentionally. And that includes a tour of my own altar to Mars, and there's altar suggestions, correspondences for Mars, such as animals and crystals and herbs, and dates for magical working. So there's a lot of stuff over there to explore. And there's also a couple of free articles that you can read on my website as well. So I'll put all the links in the notes underneath this video. So with Mars being retrograde, we can anticipate that things are a little bit slow going as we come into this month. We can anticipate that maybe at times we might feel a bit frustrated or triggered. We can anticipate that maybe we suddenly feel like we don't know why we're doing what we're doing. All these types of feelings are normal with Mars retrograde. So give yourself time to breathe. Remember, Gemini is an air sign. Some time to think. There's no rush. Coming to the first aspects of the months, I noticed that there is a lot of activation of the South Node. So we've got Venus conjunct the South Node on November the 3rd, the Sun conjunct the South Node on November the 5th, and then Mercury will conjoin the South Node on November the 6th. So this tells us that we're exploring old territory. It's like the past is lit up. Now, maybe we see someone that we used to know well, or we hear a story that awakens our past. Maybe there's a bit of a sense of being catapulted backwards. We're back in the past, and now the past seems really present. The purpose of all of this is to encourage us to explore where might we have given away our power. Scorpio is a sign associated with power. Where might we have got stuck in our fears? Where might we have allowed ourselves to remain in the dark because we're afraid of seeing the truth? These are some of the themes that we might be dealing with here. Now, as the Sun, Mercury and Venus activate the South Node, one by one, they will also oppose Uranus and square Saturn. You can see here on this image that we have this powerful T-square pattern in play. So what is happening here is yet another activation of the Saturn-Uranus square. This aspect is waning now, but it is still in play. So it's important that we pay attention to what's happening around this time. And once again, the themes that are connected with Saturn and Uranus being in a square with one another is the struggle between the old and the new. We've got the struggles between the different generations. We've got conflicts between progressive politics and more traditional political systems. We've got respecting rules versus outright rebellion, the past and the future. And with all of the lineup in Scorpio, it's like we've got emotional intensification as all these themes around power and manipulation and toxicity and release are uppermost. Now, all these themes continue into the lunar eclipse on November the 8th. As this is the final eclipse of this season, it packs a powerful punch because the full moon is directly conjunct Uranus in Taurus. This is also the date of a superior conjunction between the Sun and Mercury, which means that Mercury is moving from being a morning star to an evening star. So mentally, that makes us more reflective. We're moving into a more reflective phase rather than being in a forward thinking mode, which is how we are when Mercury is a morning star. So this full moon and eclipse brings into the foreground the radical shifts that need to take place to ensure our security for the future. Uranus in Taurus is an uncomfortable mix because Taurus is all about conservation, keeping things the same. It's very resistant to change and it prefers the well-trodden path. But Uranus is shaking everything up. We see this with financial systems. That's happening. There's been a lot of financial instability in the markets, but we've also got planetary systems and agriculture that are being disturbed by Uranus. Our survival is going to depend on new thinking, new technology, global awakening to the earth being a living being. We can't eat money. As a North Node lunar eclipse, this lunation highlights what we need to move towards so we can have greater security for the future. Those experiencing Uranus transits will find that this transit is activated by the eclipse. Now that includes me personally. I've got Uranus currently conjunct my natal Mars. Lunar eclipses tend to bring us to some kind of important conclusion, and they also help us to see our shadows. But with the moon conjunct Uranus, there's an element of expect the unexpected. Uranus is about shocks and surprises. It's a bolt from the blue that helps us to get unstuck. As Mercury opposes this eclipse, I found myself thinking that it's almost like neurological rewiring, almost like cosmic shock treatment with interdimensional downloads and high frequency information filtering down from the cosmos. On November the 16th, Venus enters Sagittarius. Now, when Venus changes signs, it changes how we approach matters to do with love, money, attraction, and values. Now, as Sagittarius is a fire sign associated with travelling to far-flung places, there's a certain excitement that can build up with this transit. We kind of want to be a bit footloose and fancy-free. In relationships, there's an urge to loosen the reins and allow for some adventure. Now, some people might find themselves literally attracted to people of a foreign persuasion. Others might fall in love with a place or feel like you found your heart in another country. We might be happier generally under this influence, but some frustration can occur if people are too non-committal with one another. The desire to kind of have a free rein can get annoying if another person wants some kind of commitment. And the other thing is that it's also very easy to be overly generous. Obviously, generosity is a beautiful thing, but it's not so good if we're giving more than we actually have to give in all different ways, whether that's money or whether that's emotionally. So we just need to watch some of the boundaries with Venus in Sagittarius. Now, Mercury will also join Venus in Sagittarius on November the 17th. So with that, we have the idea that the mind is on fire. This is Mercury telling big stories of fabulous voyages. It's reading academic books. It's opening the mind to the big questions of life. But the challenge is that Mercury is also in detriment in Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is directly opposite to Gemini, the sign that Mercury rules, or one of the signs that Mercury rules. So what can happen is that we can feel mentally overstimulated. It's almost like feeling completely overwhelmed. It's like a writer who has so many different story ideas that they don't know what to write first, and then they end up writing nothing because they just don't know where to start. So it's a little bit like that. There's also a tendency to talk the big game or to overpromise, and then for there not to be any follow-up. So to stay on the high side of the transit, we can just think about keeping the mind open and always being willing to learn. There's always something more to learn in life. Mars retrograde forms a square to Neptune on November the 19th. This is the second square between these two due to the retrograde period. The first one was on October the 12th, and then the last one will be on the 14th of March 2023, which is right before Mars exits the shadow zone. So have a little think back to October the 12th or around that date. Did an issue arise and you weren't sure how to deal with it? Maybe you had a dream or just a feeling that's left you second guessing yourself. Perhaps there's just been some sense of something tickling the edges of your intuition. Now, generally, with Mars square to Neptune, there can be a lack of motivation, tiredness, no energy, no willpower. We can feel weak, or we just don't know what to do. Neptune confounds and confuses. And then we've got Mars in Gemini, which might be torn between two different paths. Gemini is the sign associated with the twins, or we could just have multiple options available to us, but we don't know which to choose. So this can be a manifestation of Mars retrograde square to Neptune over there in Pisces. So now we're at this middle square. It's likely that we're becoming clearer about what this dilemma is. So it's really important to pay attention to your intuition, because Neptune is bringing up information from deep within the collective unconscious. And when you trust what you're receiving, when you trust your intuition, then you can act on it. But still, even at this middle stage of Mars square to Neptune, we might not know what to do. We might not be clear enough. But again, the instruction is the same. It's about slowing down, going over the material you have or the information you have. It's retracing your steps. You can meditate or go for a quiet walk to give your mind some time to mull things over. There are a lot of uncertainties around us at the moment. And, there's also a lot of smoke and mirrors at play out there in the outer world. And that keeps us guessing and keeps us feeling uncertain about everything as well. So it's all about allowing. It's okay not to know what to do sometimes. Sometimes we just need to figure out where we are in the map of our lives before we decide what we're going to do next. So yes, breathing space is important. Vesta enters Pisces on November the 20th. So Vesta is associated with the Vestal Virgins. The Vestal Virgins of Roman times would keep the perpetual flame of Vesta, the hearth goddess. They would keep that flame alive. That was their job to do. So Vesta in astrology is associated with being the goddess of the hearth fire and also a sacred priestess. She invites us to draw closer to our own inner flame. And where Vesta moves, she says, place your focus here. She speaks of concentration, literal concentration, but also concentration of energies. And because she's very associated with the idea of spiritual service, I find Vesta is very comfortable in Pisces because it's a sign connected with oneness and spiritual connection. Now, it might be helpful to have a strong spiritual practice during this time to honor Vesta in Pisces, especially if we are feeling lost or disconnected. It would be the perfect time to reconnect with all of that. Another expression of this transit could simply be the idea of service to those who are in need through charities, for example, like helping the homeless or those people who are kind of lost and forgotten by society. Vesta in Pisces is very, very compassionate as well as protective. So it would be an ideal way of honouring this transit. Vesta will be in Pisces until February the 8th, 2023. Sagittarius season begins on November the 22nd as the sun moves into this sign. There is a natural buoyancy to Sagittarius that brings with it a desire for adventure. I mentioned this with Venus going into Sagittarius. So Sagittarius energy is expansive. It asks us to stretch ourselves, to go beyond our limits, and also to search for the truth. The symbol of Sagittarius is an arrow pointed up to the sky. There is this sense of looking up to the gods to find out the absolute truth. And along with Vesta in Pisces, it does feel as though there is a very strong spiritual pull here as Sagittarius is connected to religion. The 9th house, the house that's connected with Sagittarius, was once called the house of God and also the house of dreams. So Sagittarius energy asks us to dream a bigger dream for ourselves and to embrace the big picture. It lifts us up and shows us life from a different perspective, like being in a plane looking down onto the earth. It gives us a whole different way of seeing things. The strong Sagittarius picture continues with the new moon in Sagittarius on November the 23rd. Now, this is a really interesting lunation, and honestly, it does feel like a bit of light relief after eclipse season. And even though we're still in the middle of Mars retrograde, there's some buoyancy in this lunation. The new moon in Sagittarius brings us to a new start that might involve adventure, cultivating optimism, searching for the truth, pioneering into new territory, whether that's literally through travel or metaphorically through reading or studying, for example. If you want to go back to school or take a course or pack your suitcase and book a flight, this lunation is the perfect time to seed those intentions. Now, obviously, we do still have Mars retrograde in play. So perhaps, it's not really the time for making life-changing decisions as such. They can wait till a bit later down the line when Mars is back in forward motion. But there's nothing wrong with brainstorming some ideas and getting excited about the possibilities. Now, it's also important to note that Jupiter, the ruler of this lunation, that's going to station direct just an hour after the new moon becomes exact. And also this lunation is in a trine to Jupiter as well. So it's connecting, the sun and the moon are connected to Jupiter. Stationary planets do tend to have this added weight to them. So there's a huge emphasis on big dreams, with finding faith and finding meaning, remembering that Jupiter is now back in Pisces. Belief systems are connected to Sagittarius, and Jupiter is the great sky god. So he's asking us to look up to the gods for direction, or we could say to look up to your own personal deity, or look up to your higher self for direction. When times are hard, as they have been, it is very easy to lose faith and to feel like nothing is growing, or to feel like everything is just meaningless. There's no opportunities to grow in any way. But this new moon is asking us to challenge those kinds of beliefs, that kind of thinking. The future begins in our imagination. Everything that we see began in someone's imagination. With Jupiter stationing direct, it means that we have done a lot of inner growth that is related to Jupiter. It's helpful to look at where Jupiter is traveling in your own chart, because that tells you where there are opportunities for growth in your life. So that in backward motion, maybe there was a withdrawal of energy from that part of your life, or you started to feel like whatever had been in development is now suddenly not working. So if there were issues like that, Jupiter moving forwards again sees some kind of movement in that part of your life. With Jupiter in Pisces, the prompt has been to find greater faith, to find meaning. Maybe you've been feeling like you've been doing a lot of soul searching in this area of life. But as Jupiter begins to move forwards again, it's like you start to put into practice the knowledge that you have been gifted whilst there was a lull in the developments in this part of your life. Now, collectively, with Jupiter just going back into Pisces and finishing his work here, we could say that this is about creating greater unity, more peace. It's advocating the idea of sharing our abundance, and also to find joy in the natural world and to appreciate all of the gifts that nature gives us. On November the 28th, Mars retrograde will move into a trine with Saturn in Aquarius. Now, this is super helpful. Saturn brings stability, maturity, and discipline. And I often liken Mars-Saturn aspects to the action of building muscle. So to get stronger, we have to lift heavy weights, or you might have to do more repetitions. We need to work out a schedule, an exercise routine, with each stage building on the last. And it's going to make us ache and it's going to make us sweat. But at the same time, if we follow the plan, we'll see the benefits of the hard work in the long run. Effort and energy applied over a long period of time can mean we can achieve really great things. This is the nature of Mars-Saturn aspects. And the trine, as it is in this case, brings a natural flow or ease. We want to accomplish something of note here. So this is a really excellent aspect, not only for physical exercise, but for any job that requires physical or mental energy. Now, it does help that we have this in play because Mars will also oppose Mercury on November the 29th. So we're actually moving into a period where there's going to be some challenges to Mars with all the activity that's going on in Sagittarius, the opposite sign to Gemini. So we're going to have the Mercury opposition to Mars, then we're going to have a Venus opposition to Mars, and then we're also going to have a Sun opposition to Mars, which actually signals the midpoint of the Mars retrograde period. So Venus opposite Mars and the Sun opposite Mars, those occur in December, but we begin with Mercury opposing Mars. And that can indicate some kind of conflict, as oppositions often do. So Mercury in Sagittarius is all about theorizing. But with Mars in Gemini, it's like Mars is hunting for the facts. So we get this conflict between facts and theory. Now, in practice, it might just mean that it manifests as arguments with other people. Perhaps we feel that other people are judging us, for example, or that's what it seems like. Or maybe we just feel misunderstood, or we feel like someone doesn't have the patience to listen to us, or they keep butting into us. Maybe it's our own internal voice that is badgering us and we're just feeling frustrated because we can't decide what we're supposed to do. So whatever the situation, we really need to lean into that lovely trine over there to Saturn. He can steady us. It's like he can be old friends or a wise counselor. He might be a community leader. There are people around us who we can consult for direction or we can lean on for support. The month ends with Pallas stationing retrograde on November the 30th. Now, Pallas is also a warrior, but she uses her mind and intellect to resolve conflicts. In Cancer, she's working on emotional patterns of behavior born from our relationships in the past. These are old habits or old coping mechanisms that are perhaps not working for us anymore and causing conflict in our lives. Now, we're already doing some really deep inner work with Pallas being down here in Cancer. It's at the very bottom of the global chart, the global 4th house. But now with retrograde motion, it's almost like she's taking this one step further and really looking at our ancestral heritage. This would be an excellent time to consider the stories that were really prominent when you were young about your family. What tales did you hear about your grandmother and grandfather or your great-grandparents, or even further back? What were the stories that came down to you? Maybe you want to get your DNA analysed, or you want to explore your family tree. Many of the stories we deal with in our own lives have their roots in the past. They are passed on from one generation to the next. So during Pallas retrograde, we get an opportunity to see these patterns and also to break the pattern if necessary. This concludes my reading for November 2022. I hope you find it helpful. Do hit the like button if you did, subscribe and click the notification bell. All these actions help my channel. And if you would like to hear more from me, do check out my Patreon, where I post a weekly forecast, lunation readings, I have a bi-monthly Q&A, and there's lots of other past posts that you can access depending on which tier you choose. All the links are in the notes underneath this video. And in the meantime, I wish you many blessings on your path.